I hooked it up to 1-inch schedule 40 around that 300 or so feet. We got digging. Actually, it was your son that was down there with the shovel.
Thursday night, Baptist Church Bible Study. We're in Isaiah chapter 60. Grab your Bibles, take a deep seat, and enjoy.
What's that last sound?
All right, now I got it official.
It's official.
Yeah, it's 60, not 59.
Well, let's start off right. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, this time together to study your word, to learn from each other as iron sharpens iron, and Father, just have the time of fellowship. Father, open our hearts and minds to understand what we go through tonight. And Father, may you be glorified in everything we say. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Anyhow, we have that.
I'm about saying it would be 45 to 50 pounds all you want on there.
Yeah.
Regulating the line.
Pressure regulators are preset around 40, 45, 35. I only adjust them like if they're also where the water pressure coming in is not as high as, I don't know why your water pressure coming in is not as high as some of these others. But it doesn't seem to be.
No, I don't either.
So we have to adjust the pressure regulator up a little bit. Yeah, Frank was looking to get up a little bit.
I figured over.
Actually, there was a place, because it was close to the meter, about 5 feet, and 5-6 feet from the meter where it happened, but it was blowing up over it. And so it's just a little hole on the front end of the fitting where that pipe, just enough pressure that thin wall collapsed on it. So it wasn't the full amount of water coming out. And it put probably 40 or 50 gallons in there. Yeah, that's what the Bible said. Isaiah 60. Yeah, down. Yeah, that sounds good.
I'm in the NIV. Isaiah 60, verse 1. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look about you. All assemble and come to you. Your sons come from afar, and your daughters are carried on the arm. And then you will look and be radiant. Your heart will throb and swell with joy. The wealth on the seas will be brought to you. To you, the riches of the nations will come. Herds of camels will cover your land, young camels of Midian and Ephah. And all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. All Kedar's flocks will be gathered to you. The rams of Nebaioth will serve you, and they will be accepted as offerings on my altar, and I will adorn my glorious temple. Who are these that fly along the clouds like doves to their nests? Surely the islands look to me. In the lead are the ships of Tarshish, bringing your sons from afar with their silver and gold to the honor of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has endowed you with splendor. Probably a little too far to that.
Yeah, that's fine. It's hard to break this down because it's so intermixed in what it's saying from within a verse, even. And what would be anybody's take on this, just to start off with?
Sounded like the Christmas story, to use that term.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Birth of Christ, really.
Yeah.
I perceive it that way for different reasons and things. But yeah, I think it's pertaining to that in places. Sometimes I think it's pertaining to past that, what the birth of Christ would achieve. That
I was centering on verse 6 when I said that.
And so going back, arise and shine, for your light has come. To me, that's almost that's a pretty. The light of God is going to shine upon this world, and then the glory of the Lord rises upon you. I don't think the star they look for, they use the computers to find, can ever be found because it had nothing. There may have been a group of planets that aligned that started them on their way, but when it got so far, that's not what it was. It was the glory of the Lord over top of Jesus Christ shining down upon him. And so a lot of what I base for saying that is these verses right here. And so now, verse 2 sets the stage for this light to shine. Darkness covers the earth, thick darkness over its people. Let's think about that. 400 years of silence. The people that ran the temple and did the law thing at that time was nothing like the Old Testament people running under the law. They weren't divided into groups of Levites and priests. Although there was a high priesthood that was set up, and I'm assuming you still have to be of the tribe of Levi to get in it. But when we look at the Sadducees and the Pharisees, it's not true that they necessarily had to be of any Levitical background or anything, because the Apostle Paul says he was of the tribe of Benjamin. It's in black and white. There's no beating around the bush about it. But just looking at this whole time and how everything was set up, there had been no prophets, no kings, and the people have been free to do what they want for over 400 years. How fast does this deteriorate when there's no guidance? Quick. Just look at the time of the Judges, chapter 3, where it talks about that downward spiral. They turned even worse, even faster than they did after each successive judge, and they got worse and worse. I look at this time period here as being one of the darkest times on the face of the earth. It was bleak. At this point in time, the Romans was the world far, and Daniel and his visions of the beast, that fourth kingdom, was one that just pushed him over the edge, more or less, or right up to it, and he couldn't comprehend it. He saw the viciousness of the Roman Empire. And there's no doubt about it that was the Roman Empire, even though it's not called by name. But everything in history shows us who came in after the Greeks. And there's no doubt that the Greek empire crumbled when Alexander the Great died. It went to 4 of his generals, and they fought it out with the Persians and the Medes. That's the kings of the north and the kings of the south in Daniel. It tells you who they are, the Greeks, and now that Greek empire arises, the Roman Empire. It's not a military takeover. It's not a destruction of Greece, as you would think with the others, because when Alexander died, that empire, he said, whoever's the strongest, and there were 4 generals, and they just kind of duked it out. Some amongst themselves, some with each other, and then they had to duke it out with the Persians, who's trying to regain their power. It's a pretty simple thing. And out of those 4, 3 of them go down and 1 rises to power. And now that one that rises to power, right in the middle of that, it didn't really get out of it. But it talks about the prince of the covenant was basically destroyed or killed. That'd be Christ. And it was the Romans that crucified him on the cross. You go back into Daniel and show where he was going at that time, where you are in that lineage of things. And looking at this in that regard, I want to emphasize the darkness and the Roman Empire. We have this enlightened image that I was always taught. Well, the Roman Empire was the first to have a democratic type of government. Well, for a little bit. Yeah. but it didn't work very good. And then they soon perverted all that stuff. So, yeah, it was a long lasting type of government for many centuries. But in its reality, back in this time, under these earlier Caesars and different things, they were very oppressive, always looking to take more land by force, the point of the sword and the spear. One of the cruelest group of people. They practiced, the reason they crucified, because that was the most torturous form of death that they could figure out to do in mass. And they lined miles, both sides of the road in places, with people. Rather than beheading them and doing it quick, they lined them, because sometimes it take them up to a week to die on the cross, or several days. And so, when Christ died on the cross, the Roman soldier said, surely this was the Son of God. He realized that Jesus gave up his own life. He wasn't there near long enough to have died from necessarily what happened on the cross. And he cried out, it is finished, and he gave up his own life. He chose the time and the place of his death. He said, no one takes my life from me if I give it willingly. And I maybe picked the time, and at that time was at 3 p.m., the time of the evening sacrifice. It hits the nail on the head, just according to God's directives. Before that, 400 years of darkness before the light comes. What was it like? How bad was it?
We don't have a clue how bad.
No, I don't think we have a clue. If you were traveling and you think, well, the Romans made it safe for us to travel, but you get out there and you start taking your family on a vacation down between all these people dying on the cross. Some of the corpses rotting, some of them still alive and kicking.
Be like a horror show.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
And there were, Babylon was called the most ruthless nation, or ruthless nation, when it came, and this nation put them to shame. And that was the Romans. And so I don't have a high opinion of the Roman Empire. Mine is one against God and of great darkness, and in the sense of a spiritual light, there was none. Arise and shine, for your light has come. And that light shines in the darkness, and darkness can't comprehend it. Genesis 1:3. It's there. And so now is the moment that we've been waiting for, that the Jews had looked forward to for centuries, looking to the coming of the Messiah, the one promised. And who was there in his birth? Shepherds.
Yeah.
I don't even think the wise men got there on time, but that's immaterial. At least they were trying. They saw the signs and they followed in battle. But when we look at this, to get the idea that the time that Christ came, how great was the darkness. Jesus tells us, in a sense, to look at our own lives, how great is the darkness in our lives without Christ. And how much light do we have when we have Christ? And that's how this, to me, begins. It's comparing the brightness and the glory of God to the darkness of the lowest depravity that man can get to. And we're approaching it again, in certain regards. I mean, there is some light, there's points of light, but there's also a lot of darkness in this world. And so I look at this very much, like Don was saying, as being part of the Christmas story. I think this adds to it a lot as we go through it, if you look at the right parts of it. But just how great was that darkness before Christ came, or when Christ came? And no wonder John chapter 1, the Gospel of John, starts off talking about light. And the light of the world, and light that gives life to all men. It's on and on. So you can go on for hours on this, just on the first two verses and the comparison that it's bringing out. Thick darkness over its people, but the Lord rises upon you, and the glory of the Lord appears over you. That's in verse 2. I read that and I thought for a long time, they back 25, 30 years ago, they did all the computer things and said they had found the star and this, that, and the other. And I'm thinking, it's not a star. It's a star, but not in the sense that you think,
Yeah.
you know. And so there is a prophecy about the star, a guy that walks the donkeys made it. But that's going back a long way too. And I think you look at verse 3 and you're seeing the coming of the wise men. Nations will come to your light, kings to the brightness of your dawn. If the people in places where the Jews have been sent to, or had been captive at one time or the other, in these nations that were on the outer perimeter of what we call the Middle East, remembered enough and was impressed enough to think about the idea that a star will come out of Israel, and to see these things light and the signs in the heaven, and all creation gives testimony to the glory of God. I believe it's up there. I believe it's also up in the sky. But even at that, they paid attention. Where were the Jewish people? Where were they? It's happened in their backyard. Bethlehem's 7 miles or 6-7 miles from Jerusalem, the city of David. It's even prophesied that he will be born. In Daniel, it tells you the approximate number of years till he's coming. In a sense, if you put the pieces together, I forgot how many years, I'd have to go back and look it up, but it gives a number from the issuing of the decree to the coming of the righteous. Start checking your calendar. Each year off. I don't think it actually maybe says it in years. I forgot what Daniel may be in days, but a year to a day or something like that. It's still not complicated. Any other thoughts on these first 3 verses? Nations will come to your light, and that's what we have with the 3 wise men. Or what we say 3 wise men, there's a bunch of them.
Dave, any comment?
No, not right now, but I'm listening.
Josiah?
Anybody? Any thoughts on the next few verses there of chapter 4? I know non.
I have a question on verse 4. And the daughters are carried on the arm. I'm not sure what that means exactly. Your daughters are carried on the arm. It's what's in NIV. What's the King James say? Like, on the
And
second
the
half.
daughters shall be nursed at thy side.
Lift up your eyes and look about you. All assemble and come to you. Your sons come from afar, and your daughters are carried on the arm.
And thy daughters shall be nursed at thy side. So basically, it would be carrying a child like this. There's another place that says kings, talking about that. Foreign kings would be your fathers, and queens are nursing mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that means literal royalty. I think it means those that believe in Christ, because we are kings and queens in Christ, and we bring them back. There's time coming when we're going to be gathered up and assembled. And I often say the rapture that we talk about coming, may be coming soon, may be coming later. But as the rapture approaches and we see it, the rapture is a gathering.
Right.
It's a gathering of God's elect from the 4 corners of the earth, and from the bottom of the sea, and from the grave, and we're all going to be gathered up.
Mm-hmm.
This is a little different, but it's it's still in that a gathering of the people. That is, there's some verses here.
It's a
that-
continuation, basically, of verse 3, then, in many respects, that in verse 3, it says, nations will come to your light and kings to the brightness of your dawn. And then in verses 4, 5, 6, 7, it's talking about the nations, people, sons and daughters. And the wealth of the seas will be brought to you. I mean, I think of the gifts that were given, and to you, the riches of the nations will come. I still am looking at the time when Christ was born. Is that what we're talking about here or not?
I think it's a part therein, and probably a major part. My thought would be that we look at any time that Christ comes to the earth, and when he sets up these things like he was doing the first time, this is going to be a natural result of Christ on the earth. When he comes for the 1,000-year reign, same thing's going to happen again. And so, yes, and
But certainly not everyone, the Jews, as you just mentioned, that the Jews didn't, the majority of Jews did not understand what was happening, apparently. It doesn't seem, I mean, I think Mary, a Jewess would have known what was happening. And I think Joseph knew what was happening, but in general, it didn't seem like the Jews understood.
yeah. Well, I mean, nobody's ever seen a virgin conceive and bear a child. And just deal with that little issue here as we look at the birth of Christ. And I think this is a lot of what it's speaking of. There would be a lot of confusion now. This one girl in your lifetime that you know from high school or anywhere else, anybody else, would you think there was anybody there that was going to be so good that they were chosen that be the virgin birth? So most of the time when people heard that, what did they think? Or how many times has that been used as an excuse?
I'm about to say, you're nuts. You're lying. Yeah.
Never been seen before, you're gonna believe it now. Never happened
Exactly.
before, why should it happen now? And that, I'm sure Mary and Joseph went through a lot of those types of questions and scrutiny and a lot of people think, yeah, right,
Mhm.
tell your own story, it doesn't matter at certain points on different things, but what is looking at here is the idea that some things did happen at his birth. The shepherds were.
So what was verse 5 saying then?
Okay.
I don't understand exactly who's speaking there. Can you read it to me and explain it?
Well, probably not with precision. You will look and be radiant in your heart and will throb with joy. I think it's talking about Christ as he looked at what was happening, or God in that part. The wealth of the seas will be brought to you. I think that is speaking to Christ. And
Yeah, I agree with that first part, but I don't know who's talking there.
I think it's one of these places where you could look from different perspectives. The King James, I'm jumping across the page here.
Yeah, sure.
Thou shalt see and flow together, and thine heart shall fear. And Jesus was one that excelled in the fear of the Lord and doing exactly what the Father wanted. I think it's the Father talking to the Son. That's a big statement there. The Father is saying, Son, you're going to look and you're going to see this, and this is what's going to happen when you do this. Because you have been willing to humble yourself and turn to past and say, I will be that sacrifice for man. For the joy set before him, Christ endured the cross. That's also scripture. And I think this is just another way of restating that in a little different manner. And I think it's the Father talking to the Son. And that's hard for me to back up and say this is that way. Just the way it seems. The wealth of the seas will be brought to you. That's one of the things Satan said with Jesus when he was in heaven. The one with all these nations I will give to you if you will bow down and worship me. The wealth of the sea will go up to them. It's not happening. It happens sooner that way in certain ways. No, the best I can explain it in the way it appears is that it is an inside conversation. There's a few of them in here where the Father speaks to the Son, either directly or indirectly. Again, this is coming through a prophet. I'm going to say it somewhat indirectly, but I'm also saying it's something that has happened in the reality of heaven. Because I think heaven is real. I think it's a reality. It's there. It's more real than anything we'll experience here on this earth. And when it's talking like this, I think this is a conversation between the Godhead, amongst the Godhead. I know we look and say that sounds crazy.
We'll go with that. That's good.
But that's how I look at it. And so, anyhow, and when we get into verse 6, herds of camel will cover your land. It's still the Father talking to the Son, because that land may belong to the Jews in a sense, but it was ultimately God's. It was all ultimately for Christ. Young camels of Midian, Ephah, and from Sheba will come bearing golden incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. We hear, let's say, 3 kings. And how many nations are mentioned? Midian, Ephah, Sheba. I was thinking it was no. And the flocks of Kedar, there's 4. I think there are quite a few. And if you look at the regions from which they come from a diverse area. They had to meet somewhere by the leadership of God. And I guess they could all got together somewhere and said, this is what we're going to do. But I really don't think that was the case. I think they sat out here, they sat out here, they sat out here before they got to where they went in to talk to King Herod. They were a group that probably traveled the last few miles together. And don't ask me the map and all that. I have no idea, just the way it seems. But what's amazing to me is you see places back here talking about and details in the birth of Christ way before they came. And it used to strike me as odd that would be, that you will find more detail on certain things in the Old Testament than in the New Testament, in which time they occurred. And so I think it's there. It's God's job to conceal the matter, and our job to look it up. And so we have to search for it. I've actually worked a little different Proverbs with it. To the glory of God to conceal a matter, and to the glory of the kings to search it out. And we would be closer to the actual verse. But bearing gold and incense. It doesn't say myrrh. 2 out of the 3 gifts that would be given here are listed in the New Testament.
Well, I don't know the Greek, but incense is generic because both myrrh and
Yeah, it may include both.
frankincense are both types of incense.
I just know that they're pretty much at least 3 are there. And they're proclaiming the praise of the Lord. They came to worship. What would it be like on a Sunday morning at the Methodist Church And it looked like the parking lot at the school in a big ball game tournament. He was playing for first place. A big basketball tournament. That everybody just came and met together to give God the glory. That'd be pretty amazing.
It'd be a good thing.
But what if they came from towns in every direction? And there was only standing room. They covered the town of Hugh. What would it be like?
Oh, man. Couldn't describe it.
Crowded.
Mhm.
I would say revival is happening.
Yes, okay, would you understand that we had nothing to do with it?
We have nothing to do with it.
We had nothing to do with
Absolutely.
it. God did it.
Yes.
God led him, and that's what this is talking about. God led these people there for the glory of God.
There was a movie. Right? This movie that came out when I was a kid in high school, because I'm thinking I lived in West Virginia, so I was in high school. And you guys are probably old enough to remember when we only had like 2 channels.
Mhm.
Well, we had one. We had an antenna, but we got one channel in pretty good. We had to move it to try to get another channel. So we basically had one channel all the time. That was it.
From really?
You have to go to West Virginia. That's too close to the border. You have to get deep in West Virginia. So I always do this because we're like right a little southern than dead center between
Yeah.
Charleston and Beckley. Yeah, we make fun of people from Wheeling because we don't even call them West Virginia.
So
We got to get even more.
Where's yours come from?
Mossy, West Virginia.
Mossy.
Yeah, Mossy. But this movie itself, it's about this black pastor, and he is just his congregation. He's trying to do the right thing, and they are just messing them all up. And the whole thing, they basically get rid of him. That's the whole movie. Great guy, and you just follow this guy's life. They got rid of him. But the guy they replaced him with was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So it's like sometimes that had to happen to that guy to get this guy up in there. So sometimes we look at it, and I say we, but sometimes preachers look at it as, oh, we're failing. We're not failing. There's one person who we're getting. Now, one person might be that person who's God's going to use to.
Might be in Moses.
That's right. Yeah. 80-year-old man who can't talk to people.
Well, let's
Yeah.
see. But if we look at this, isn't that what John the Baptist did?
Well, I was going to make a point. There's a few people here that are almost 80. You guys are almost ready.
Hey,
Take a notice.
What'd you say?
I'm just saying, there's some people here that are almost 80. Closer than me, closer than you. Yeah. I feel old now that Josiah's here. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's why I tell people I'm older. Hold on. Moses was 80 before he ever
Mhm.
stepped back to the land.
His ministry didn't begin until 80.
That's right.
But yeah, all these things go in to show us and to help us, I believe, understand that just how miraculous some little things that seem like nothing that we almost take for granted were. It's one thing to say, well, a few angels appeared to some shepherds out in the field. What's that mean? What's that to me? You know, you pay attention, sit up and then listen to the story and get into the background. It means a lot. The idea that God is going to draw these nations to Israel because of a sign in the sky, a star, whatever, however it all worked, and then lead them there by his glory is pretty amazing. These ain't little miracles, these are major.
Mhm.
That he's going to have a young woman in Israel agree to the virgin birth and know the scorn probably that she's going to get for saying that.
If you, I look at this story here, and I think that, no disrespect, God, but I could write this better to make this make more sense. First, I'm not going to choose a virgin birth because no one's going to believe it. I'm going to choose a normal birth. I'm not going to use the shepherds out in the middle of the field. I'm going to let everybody know. I'm going to have Jesus come from a king. But no, these little tiny things don't make sense for a reason. because God did it the way he wanted to do it. The part where you have to look at it and say that's not going to happen. All these little tiny things added up to God's plan. So, if you think if you're going to write out a book of Christianity, you're going to write it out a lot better. I want to make this make sense for people, so they're gonna do this. No, God's like, I'm gonna do it exactly like this. Because the shepherds were very well, they were like the shepherd farmers of today. No, they were very low caste of society. So he chose the very lonely nobodies out in the middle of nowhere, guarding the sheep.
Well, the idea was they were outside. They were probably looking at the stars. Some were probably admiring the stars when all this happened.
Nothing else out there.
And so to me, it's such an amazing picture of how God orchestrated these things. And we actually see him. It's not just that he orchestrated, but he had them written thousands of years.
That's right.
So people say there is no God. You figure this out. Let's go back and if we just use the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament for the birth of Christ, there's a lot more to it than that. There's enough there to make you think, no man could write this. There's none of us smart enough to get all the events right in the right order and to be able to lay them out and to have them where they can be put back together and seen, from the hindsight. Yes, it'd been very difficult to read straight through this and to understand what it was talking about. But as it said in the New Testament, it's basically there for us. I mean, it was there for them too, but it had a lot to do with us, so we could look back and say with assurance, God did this. He did it in his timing, and we are blessed because of it. It's hard for me to imagine. I don't have a good enough mind to figure out how he figured out all these events, put them all together, and put it all together at the right time. He had to have Roman Empire ruling the land. Oh, we think that's well, he figured that one out.
Mhm.
It's beyond. I think it says it. My ways are not your ways, or my thoughts are not your thoughts.
Right.
His thoughts are higher, and it sure is good to read them and see how they came together, and to know that God's thoughts and his promises, one, always come true. If he's promised it, it's going to happen,
Mhm.
and there's no question on that. Anyhow, somebody, how far did we get down to?
I read through 9.
Through 9. Was anything in 7, 8, and 9 we want to talk about?
Why do they call it the ships of Tarshish? I mean, because Paul talked about his work too. The ships of Tarshish.
Ships of Tarshish.
It would be like saying the Navy of America, the Navy of China.
I know.
It was the one of the
Paul
biggest.
was, in his writings.
In this case, I want to say the merchant
Marine.
marines of England
Yeah.
during especially the Second World War. Some of the things they pull out because ships of Tarshish, he says that because they were seafaring traders. They were the best seafaring trade people in the known world at that time. So he's saying, okay, something that's maybe a little bit more understandable to some of today's younger generation, the Amazon of their day. If you want something, the guys from Tarshish can get it for you if it's available. From across the known world, if there's any chance of you obtaining it, they'll sell it to you.
Good enough.
Ships of Tarshish. They're in several places. They're mentioned somewhat at random, I guess would be the best way. Sometimes okay, sometimes not okay, in different places. But what we see is that at a certain point, there are wonders that tend to have received the story to the belief, and they're in about doing God's will. In the lead are the ships of Tarshish. And so, and they're bringing your sons from afar. Now, to understand that, I think you got to understand who the sons are they're bringing from afar. Is it just native born Israelites by blood?
Well, I think
Or is it,
the census that was being taken at that time. People that hadn't moved back to their native towns and areas were sent back in droves by Rome to take the census.
and so if you're from Judea, you had to go back to Bethlehem. That's pretty amazing. So, how hard would it be for us to get Bethlehem, that's not the head of Judea at all, to become the place where you're going to take the census? Wouldn't Jerusalem make more sense? Bigger town. That's the place that has all the people going there anyhow, off and on and going to the temple. Why Bethlehem? Why would you pick Bethlehem? And according to the man's logic, we would. Why Bethlehem? Because that's where Jesus was going to be born. And because of the census, that's what we're going to take. Think about orchestrating this, trying to from God's point of view, to get Mary and Joseph from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And how are you going to accomplish it? How is it going to be brought about in the physical world? What's that going to take? That's another miracle all in itself, the fact that they're having the census in Bethlehem. And then the fact that this crazy guy somewhere off in Rome said, I want to know how many people I got in charge down there. And how many people I'm in charge of, because I'm the greatest ruler there ever has been, or ever will be. That's kind of the thoughts I had. And so you get Jesus, or you get Joseph and Mary in the right spot at the right time. If they'd done it 4 years earlier, wouldn't have been so good, would it? A month later, to me, the precision of the Bible is just phenomenal. I mean, it's just exceedingly accurate in what God has predicted and how it comes to pass. But going back to the ships of Tarshish, I think we'll find out more about that. But bringing your son from afar, those that believe in God, that's what they're bringing them back to, because God's going to set these foreigners' gifts on His altar where they've never been accepted before. That's just down verses. With their silver, their gold, to honor the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for He has endowed you with splendor. Foreigners will build your wall; their kings will serve you. So in anger I struck you. I will, in favor, I will show you compassion. Open your gates. Your gates will always stand open. Never will they be shut day or night. And so we get into things that's probably leading him to the 1,000-year reign of Christ. As a result of that, hasn't happened today. As we look at it, that we look at these things. I went the wrong way for the sacrifices. Verse 7. All Kedar's flocks will be gathered to you, rams of Neobo, whatever that is. Will serve you. They will be accepted as offerings on my altar. Rams of foreign nations, lambs of foreign nations. Just talking about people that believe and honor God. They came to Jerusalem to honor God. And so the sons and daughters are not necessarily, as far as I'm looking at this, it's showing, as Isaiah has been talking about, almost from the beginning stuff about how the Gentiles were going to become involved in and would become a major part thereof. They're talking about a transition from the law of the Old Testament under Moses into the transition of the law of Christ, or the giving of the Spirit, if you want to say it that way, of salvation. And there's not much difference, but there is, all at the same time. There is some difference in them. And so we have a better covenant with better promises. But anyhow, all these things, these gold and silver, the offerings of their animals will be accepted on the altar in Jerusalem. And I look at so much of this, I look at not only talking about the birth of Christ, it's not just the one event, it's the things that follow it. We know it looks as if when the wise men got there, in the book of Matthew, they got there maybe up to 2 years late. That doesn't really matter for me. The glory of God was still shining down, and they still found the house where Jesus was, and they worshiped him. And these things, they brought these things, and the offerings of gold, frankincense, and myrrh was accepted on that altar, which would be Christ. I mean, they were accepted and probably used to help pay for their trip to Egypt. But nonetheless, as we look at these things, we see it, but then it doesn't stop there. It's alluding to more. And as I read much of the Bible, one of the things I'm looking at is not only just now, sometimes it has to be just now, and how does it apply here, but how does this apply as it is actually pushed forward? What's this going to mean to us in years to come, as it means to them in years to come? Because this doesn't sound like it's going to end right here with this one-time event. It sounds like it's going to just continue and keep getting bigger and bigger and becoming more and more glorious until we reach a time when the gates of Jerusalem will never be shut day or night. And I'm looking, I believe Christ is going to be reigning on the throne at that time. I believe we're talking about the 1,000-year reign of Christ. That's what it appears to be to me. And so I'm sure there's other people with a great many different other ways, but it's one of the easiest ways to look at this is the results of what the birth of Christ would bring about. It wasn't done for nothing. God tells Jesus, it's too inside, and I say it's too small a thing for you just to be, to bring Israel back and to be Israel's savior. You'll Savior, you will also be a light to the Gentiles. And so it was always twofold. And so as we swing from one period of time, we live in the blessings of the revelation of Jesus Christ at its fullest, up until the point to where he returns. And we have the knowledge of God at its fullest. We're without excuse. There are just so many things here as it comes to pass. I like to look at the thing and just kind of think, how do you get from this point of talking about his birth and then talking about the millennial reign of Christ? How many people are going to be there? How great is that gathering going to be when that gathering occurs? How great will the rapture be when it occurs? Because I think that's the final gathering. And the bringing in the sons and daughters. But it's going to happen many times before that. It's not a one-time event. The burning bush with Moses, one time event. Somebody tells me they went out here and got a bush burning, I probably won't be a little skeptical. Okay.
I saw some burning.
Well,
They were being consumed, so
I mean, without it being consumed, and then God has to speak to you out of that bush.
no, they were just, regular burning.
I'll ask you what you've been smoking.
Yeah, that would be a legitimate question.
Yes.
And so, well, let's read 10. So, 10 through 14.
I'll get it. The sons of foreigners shall build up your walls, and their kings shall minister to you. For in my wrath I struck you, but in my favor I have had mercy on you. Therefore your gates shall be open continually, they shall not be shut day or night. that men may bring to you all the wealth of the Gentiles and their kings in possession. For the nation and kingdom which will not serve you shall perish, and those nations shall be utterly ruined. The glory of Lebanon shall come to you, the cypress, the pine, the box tree together, to beautify the place of my sanctuary. And I will make the place of my feet glorious. Also the sons of those who afflicted you shall come bowing to you, and those who are despised you shall fall prostrate at the soles of your feet. And they shall call you the city of the Lord, Zion of the Holy One of Israel.
Buildings, temple. What about Jerusalem, right?
I'd say that. Yes.
Jerusalem and parts thereof. So we were thinking. When Solomon built the first temple, who cut the rocks and the timbers? They weren't supposed to use a hammer on the stones when they're put in, I don't believe. They had to be done beforehand. I'm trying to remember, I might be wrong on this, but I think a lot of it was to be hewn and then that, get perfect and then bring them in and set them in place. I remember the guy's name that cut a lot of the logs and pines and stuff from Lebanon. It was amazing. Most of that stuff, I believe, was probably pre-cut. Not 100% for sure. I'm sure some of it probably had that, and maybe not. They all been pre-cut and they got it. Anyhow, looking at the foreigners where you build your walls. What kind of walls would there be there in Jerusalem? Stone? What makes a wall stand?
Longer, or so it's got the rock the right way. Prove it.
Cornerstone.
Yes, you gotta have a foundation. That's where I was looking at the rocks. The rocks depend upon how strong the wall is, has to depend upon the foundation that it has. And so foreigners will build the walls, but they must build on the right foundation, mustn't they? And what would that foundation be?
It's about Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
Am I right?
but I don't understand how you would get that from. My question is, who are those foreigners? Who will build your walls?
Okay, good question.
Because, and I don't understand how you could get to the cornerstone so quickly. It doesn't appear to me in this passage.
I've worked around and been around so many houses that have no true foundation.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And
Got
so,
a good foundation, but
yeah,
he's not talking about that here.
no, I was talking about the foreigners who are building the walls.
Yeah.
We've just worked on enough buildings, when we see walls, we think of what's holding them up, walls is doing it.
And so
We've been about around a bad foundation,
But
I should say, when we
foreigners-
see walls, we're thinking, okay,
the reason I
what's
went
under?
to the foundation is the foundation that we would need to help build the walls of Jerusalem and the Zion would be the foundation of Christ. That would
The
be
sons of the
best.
foreigners in this case, I think, are simply the Gentiles.
And
In this case, I'm going to say the church.
that's where I would go with it. It is foreigners and it is the church. It could say nations there as well, maybe the kingdom does say nations, many times they interchange those verse 10. And some of the strangers, here it calls them strangers, which shall build up thy walls. And so basically just talking about people from different nations that believe. Okay, let me ask a crazy question. How many nations in the world will have somebody that's saved?
All of them, isn't it?
The answer is all of them. From every tribe and language. Down in the book of Revelation, you see where the people that are in heaven, and they'll be from every tribe and language and nation. And those are the foreigners. And thus the Lord guards the city. The watchmen stand guard in vain. That's a verse. It's in scripture. Trying to think of where it is. And the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain on this.
Nehemiah someplace? Is that a Nehemiah?
I was thinking Proverbs, but I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
could be, yeah.
I don't know right offhand. I know that the verse is there. It could be in Psalms too. But I know that that idea that the Lord has to watch over these things or none of them is going to stand. Now, if the Lord is there in Jerusalem and he's ruling and you're building up the walls, think they're going to stand? You think they will stand? Yeah. But the foundation they need and things, when he's talking about foreigners, I don't think it just means anybody and everybody. I think it means those that are faithful to serve, those that want to serve. They're there because they want to be, not because they have to be. The foreigners are those that's wanting to look at this as one of the greatest opportunities of their lives to win into Hiram was that guy's name in the Old Testament that did the walks. But anyhow, I don't know, I just now thought of it.
For me, there's a transition here between verse 9 and 10. I was chasing a rabbit because Josiah said something about frankincense and myrrh, so I had to look it up. Myrrh is the actual stuff they stuck on Christ's body after he died. It's more of an oil, not a burning incense. So I had to chase that in my head and figure out. But right here, when you look at it from 10 down, I'm seeing the millennial reign. I'm seeing the kingdom. Verse 11, therefore thy gate shall be open continuously. Revelation. People can kind of come and go as they please, as long as they're Christians.
Look up here to Zechariah, he's talking about the sons of foreigners or whatever in verse 10. Look at 6:15 in Zechariah, and it says, even those who are far away shall come and build the temple of the Lord. Then you shall know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. This shall come to pass if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God.
I don't know if that brings any light out or not. It's not the same, but
The idea that God is going to use people that were willing to do things and do it with such zeal and precision, and that God was going to give them that ability. If we look at when Israel came out of Egypt, God gives certain people certain abilities to work in silver and gold, or to do embroidery, whatever the task was needed to prepare the tabernacle in the wilderness, that they found the talent. They found people that had either worked with rugs or weaving, and they were given the knowledge and the wisdom to be able to do this thing with an exactness that would please God, to be accomplished by the heavenly tabernacle. And so we look at this, and surely that's what I think of here is these people are going to be blessed, gifted to rebuild the walls. Their gifts are going to be accepted on the altar, their sacrifices. Everything about them will be. And so there's a lot of passages that I believe leads me to believe that all these foreigners are going to outnumber the Israelites, at least up until the time of the end.
They
And so-
specialize.
Yeah, I mean, one, simply because there's more Gentiles. We live in the days of the Gentiles and the blessings that are there. And I feel that we owe it. You know, if I had the chance to go work on the walls of Jerusalem, yeah, I would like to go.
Oh, yeah, I would
Even
too.
though I'm too old to do much of anything, but every.
You're not even 80 yet, so I don't want to hear that.
Yeah,
You're not even 80 yet.
yeah, I know.
So, yeah,
You
you're
can
not even.
supervise your union card till you're 80.
That's what I'm saying. You can't get your Moses card anyway. Yeah.
I
so
know,
don't wanna
but
hear it.
you know, when Moses was struck at 120, it says, "As I had not been under that."
I hear it.
You should watch me try and drive home and see.
Well, scary.
But anyhow, and you know, his body, his strength hasn't withered or whatever, however you want to call it. He still had a lot of strength, and you know, God had preserved him like he had the Israelites' clothing and other things. He had given him that ability.
I actually
I
recant.
don't know that I can claim that.
I changed my whole exegesis on this. I don't think it's a transition at all. I think the whole thing itself is talking about the millennial reign. And I'm not that smart. So one of the verse 10 gave me a reference in Revelation. So I just went back and read it. Revelation 21:24. Spot here. And the nations then which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor unto it. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But then that one actually gave me a reference to verse 3 of chapter 60. Now I'm reading it in context of Revelation and going back and looking at verse 3, and then King James says, and the Gentiles shall come to the light, and the kings of the brightness of thy rising. And then I think, why was there a temple built? God said, I'm not going to live in that. David, you're not going to build it. Your son's going to build it because your hands are too red. So I'm going to dwell in that temple. Where's the temple of God at now? It doesn't exist.
Well, it does. It's in us.
It's in us. So if you go back a little further in Revelation, in that same chapter there, I'm not going to be able to point at it right now, but it's in there somewhere real close. There's no temple.
No.
It's a light. So the nations, going back to chapter 60, the nations, even the ships of Tarsus that you were talking about, they're all coming to the temple, which is the light in Revelation.
I would also explain why myrrh is left out. Myrrh is a funeral
That's right.
ointment. No need for a funeral ointment the second time.
And yeah, there it is, 22:22. I'm sorry, 21:22. And I saw no temple wherein for the Lord all God Almighty. And I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. And the city had no need of sun, neither of the moon, and the shine of it. And the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof.
The reason I tend to make this, going back to the idea of the birth of Christ, is talking about what I tend to believe is one of the first things. So you're seeing a repetition and a follow-up thereon. Thick darkness covers the earth.
Yes.
Thick darkness is over its people, but the Lord rises upon you, talking about a specific place and time in the midst of the darkness. It is not yet with him on his throne in the heavenly Jerusalem. And so I'm looking at a transition that goes that way. Nations will come to your verse 3. Nations will come to your light and kings to the brightness of your dawn. And you could take the new heavenly Jerusalem as a new dawn, surely enough. I mean, without a doubt, I wouldn't argue that whatsoever. But this sounds like the first time around. And that would be coming to Christ at his birth. It's a new order of things, a new covenant that's coming into the world. And so I think that's the reason for the contrast of the darkness to the light. Now, I'm not going to argue the rest of it with you because I agree. It goes pretty quick into
Yes.
it transcends time, which I find quite often within the scriptures that they're double prophecies. It's partially fulfilled here, but it'll be fulfilled more detailed later. So Ecclesiastes, Solomon writing, what has been will be again. And you see a lot of it, I think, in things like this. So you're looking at one point, and then you're looking at it from another point of view. It's like we're going through how many thousands of years here in a few.
Words.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a few short verses. We just went 2,000 to 3,000 years, you know. But to God, that's the way he sees things. He sees them. I like to say, I think C.S. Lewis is the one I first read it. God calls all time soon. You know, and so he sees the birth, and at the same time, he's seeing not only from that birth, but the result of that birth right up through time into the heavenly Jerusalem. We just eclipsed the 1,000-year reign of Christ also. In that, I see parts of it alluding to that 1,000-year reign of Christ, and then you can move it right on into the heavenly Jerusalem, which are different time periods. I think the 1,000-year reign of Christ is a literal 1,000-year reign here on this earth. And then I look at the heavenly Jerusalem where God says it's done, it's over. I make all things new, and so everything becomes new, and we go into this completely new state of things that is in perfection, like we had back in Genesis chapter 1, before sin entered the world. And I'm looking at that because nothing impure or unclean can get up on this highway that leads there. And only the redeemed of the Lord will walk there. And I look at these things, and to me, it's a great encouragement to know that what starts here may be a small part, and it may be all that we see in our lifetime. Just like Abraham didn't see all things. He didn't see the promised land actually becoming the promised land in his lifetime. And yet he believed God, was credited to him as righteousness. And we see what God took that from and made it become. Because of Abraham. My thing is here is we go through this and we're looking at what I believe Christ is going to do as he comes in the dark world. In the fullness of time and in the darkest points of the earth. I would almost say that we were about as bad then. And maybe slightly better, but not a whole lot better than going into the time where Noah preached. I think it was dark. I think it was at the point where something had to change, or God's going to wipe it out pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so at that point, looking at the darkness, at least spiritually that way, and then saying, okay, this is the point at which God chose to put the light of his son into the world. That's an amazing thing. Take the darkness of that age and time, and then see how much light that little beginning. Some girl claims to, something, and nobody believes it, and her husband's getting ready to divorce her, and all these things that we actually see in the scripture. But then it all comes together. And none of the things that we think would happen did happen. And then he goes on to die for the sins of the world. And when it looks like the disciples thought they'd lost everything when Jesus died on that cross, best I can tell, they were, in shock and despair. Even though he had often told them, I'll rise on the third day. that hadn't soaked in.
Mhm.
And so we look at the plan, and it's amazing to me to see how far back that plan existed. And it's in my beliefs that the plan existed before anything was created.
Amen.
That God said, this is the plan, this is what we want to do, let's make man in our image, let's just show on earth. And, to see where it ends up in passages like this, and Revelation, to me, it's pretty encouraging. If God knows all this, he knows enough to take care of all of us. I don't have to worry in that regard. Yeah. Any other ideas, questions, comments? Up to verse 15, up through 14. And I can't see the clock back there. Wendy's.
8:20. 40 minutes until somebody's bedtime.
Oh, okay.
It's not physically located here.
What I find amazing is if you think about this prophecy where there will be the remnant that want to go and get to Jerusalem or the holy country there, but then there's going to be the people in the way that still don't believe. And yet we're still going to succeed. The remnant, the believers are going to succeed. As you've been discussing this tonight, I started thinking about things that I've never thought about before. And one of them is whenever people came to see Jesus when he was born, I've been in parts of the world where tribalism is so intense, it's hard to get people to even talk to each other from the different tribes. And yet here you have the leaders of nations or countries coming to him that possibly didn't get along with each other. And so these are just some of the things that I was thinking about, that when you talked about from every nation and every tribe, we're going to have those believers that, and that's what I've been getting out of this tonight.
It's always amazing, Dave. You're talking about the tribalism in other parts of the world. Then when we go there as a foreigner, we relate them all the same. You're all tribes of this country.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm thinking you guys are all the same, but they're like sometimes completely different languages, just on the other mountain range. Like West Virginia hillbilly compared to Illinois hillbilly. The accent's a little bit different. Yeah. At least we're not killing each other over moonshine anymore.
I know some missionaries to the Philippines, and I was asking in what language they talk to most people, and they said the vast majority of the time it's English. And I was kind of caught back, and I said, well, what about, I said, the different languages in the Philippines. I know there's more than one. She said, yeah, it's so bad that people on one side of the mountain can't talk. This is on an island.
That's right.
On an island, they can't talk to each other in their own language because there's too many nuances that they have added to it, and they don't know how to take what's being said in a very basic or close language. So it's easiest for them to talk to each other in that third language. It is either one of the two. Yes, you're right. It's interesting that when Jesus died on the cross, there was 3 languages on that sign up there. Here's the King of the Jews. And I'm going to get this right. I think it was Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew. And so the Greeks and the Aramaics didn't, not, the Hebrews and the Aramaics didn't talk to each other because of just enough differences, even though they're a sister language. They're very similar from what I've been told. It was easier for them to talk to each other in Greek because they all had to understand Greek, and that was the common third language. And that's why the Bible is probably in Greek in the New Testament as much as any other reason, other than God wanted it that way. I like in verse 13 here, before we get going too far. And so it's talking about the glory of Lebanon and the pine and fir and cypress tree together. But it says, I will glorify the place of my feet, of thy feet. And in the King James, I will make the place of thy feet glorious. And have to stop and think that God's actually talking about the places where Jesus walked, the places he was, where his feet went. At least that's how I'm taking it that way. The places that wasn't just everybody's feet per se. In a sense, maybe, yeah, for those that believe, like Abraham, I'll give you each every foot of land that your feet steps upon and all this. But I'm looking at this even more precise and looking at the poor, to walk where Jesus walked. We are commanded to walk as he walks in 1 John. And so just looking at the place that his feet walked, and that's singling out in Jerusalem for the most part, although he walked in many other places. But the main place that he was concerned about was getting back to Jerusalem and being there at the right Passover for the one that had been planned since the creation of the world. But anyhow, whether it's speaking of Jesus or it's speaking of our feet, how great is our lessons? Anyhow, let's somebody read 15, I guess probably to the end of the chapter.
Although you have been forsaken and hated, with no one traveling through, I will make you the everlasting pride and joy of all generations. You will drink the milk of nations and be nursed at royal breast. Then you will know that I, the Lord, am your Savior, your Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob. Instead of bronze, I will bring you gold and silver in place of iron. Instead of wood, I will bring you bronze and iron in place of stones. I will make peace your governor and righteousness your ruler. No longer will violence be heard in your land, nor ruin or destruction within your borders. But you will call your walls salvation and your gates praise. The sun will no more be your light by day, nor will the brightness of the moon shine on you. For the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. Your sun will never set again, and your moon will wane no more. The Lord will be your everlasting light, and your days of sorrow will end. Then will all your people be righteous, and they will possess the land forever. They are the shoot I have planted, the work of my hands, for the display of my splendor. The least of you will become 1,000, the smallest a mighty nation. I am the Lord, and it's time I will do this swiftly.
Talking about the end of our time off this earth, and when that New Jerusalem is in place.
Yeah.
Earlier, I looked at some of the things and I'm saying, I think it's a conversation within Godhead. This time it's a conversation with us. With those, a picture of those who believe, Jews, Gentiles, alike. And I don't think it necessarily distinguishes here. And it seems to go from a time when the world hadn't been completely made it to the heavenly Jerusalem, but to where people are still being added to a time when we enter into, here we go again, it's another one of those few verses you covered a lot of time. And going through that idea. What's the new Jerusalem going to look like?
My team's saying it.
Cube.
Cube for one, gold, silver, jewels.
A really big box.
Yes, and bright light.
A really big box. Yeah.
The sun will no longer be your light by day, or the brightness of the moon will not shine on you. Yeah, well, that happens in the heavenly Jerusalem, where there's no longer any tears, as it talks about down in verse 20. I think it's 20. The days of your sorrow will end, no tears. But that doesn't happen until the new heavens and the new earth.
Right.
And so, looking at the way this transpires, is talking about the fact that one of us will become 1,000. In other words, there's still time for saving others. And then we're up until the time that's perfection. And so what's our job? What would you say our job is here today?
Oh, recruit.
To do your best and lead others to the Lord. Not to put a stumbling block in anybody's way. The idea that if we know we have this to look forward to, what on this earth should we fear? I didn't say it was always that way, because we all have that. I still try to jump, even though I can't jump, but it still startled me. I don't like snakes. But the picture of it, the idea that your son will never said again, there's no more death, no more dying, the last enemy of God's been destroyed, no more these things. Wow. You ought to be able to take this and get people to understand that we've all sinned, fall short of the glory of God. If you want to go where this is talking about, you're going to have to change. You're going to have to accept God. You're going to have to do things that God wants you to do. This is not just given. And Christ died for all, but not all will accept. And that's the question. Our job, simply obey. You can get books and books and books and books and books, and you could fill this entire room with different books printed in the last 10 years, pretty much on that idea, and yet it can be said in a few words. I didn't say it was easy.
No.
Done. Print. It's a print.
Yeah.
Give me $1,000. There you go. Done.
It's the question becomes is why aren't we better servants? What should the servant be doing? Serve the master.
Commands for one. Do what he tells you for two. What's the main thing he tells you?
We have this little thing in our lives called pride.
Yeah.
Pride keeps us from doing a lot of things that God would have us do. From saying things. I don't want to sound like an idiot. That's what I'm thinking to myself. If I say this, I'm really going to sound really dumb.
Yeah, who's putting that in your mind?
Satan's putting that in.
Yes.
There's no doubt about where the things that they go against God's word. Okay, I want us to think just for a moment here while we're dealing with these things. Think of a time when you did what God wanted you to do, in spite of maybe looking like an idiot or a fool. Any things when you stepped out and you may have been nervous, but you spoke up, or whether you're nervous or not, doesn't matter. I hear you're nervous anyhow. So, but when you stepped out and did it, you know, get a door slammed in your face, somebody call you a crazy man, an idiot, a fool for believing those things.
Got laughed at.
Hmm?
Got laughed at.
And
What do you want? You know, stuff like that.
I don't want to hear that anymore.
Get that too.
We all have things like that. What about times when we didn't do what God said, that we realized that we messed up and didn't do it?
Yeah.
And then you come to realize later. How often do you think about that?
Quite a bit.
Why?
Because I should have done it.
Because you should have done it. That's one reason. But I'm looking for something a little different. But that's a
Oh.
good reason.
It's gonna make you more sensitive to the next time.
You better believe it.
Yes.
We learn more from our failures, is what I'm going to say, many times than we do from our successes. We have to think really hard about when we get it right, because especially if it went right, we might not, or we may or may not, have certain things that we remember about it. But when we fail, we really remember. And the reason for that is we don't want to fail again, do we?
Mm-mm.
We don't want to go through that again.
I don't want mud in my eye.
Well, I'm in a church in Minnesota. Young girl in the church has some kind of tumor or something in her brain that she's fought with for a number of years. And she's teenage. And we'll say 14, 15, maybe 16. I don't remember the exact age. And all through the service, I just knew that I was supposed to talk to the girl. Don't know what I was going to say. I have no idea. I just knew that I was supposed to go talk to her. And I knew about the condition, and I kind of put two and two together and figured there was something there that I was going to say, or at least ask her how she was doing and things like that. That's on Sunday morning. And so I get halfway there. It's a small church, not any wider than this is. And I'm then in the middle aisle, and she's on the other side of the aisles there. And I start to go up there, and her grandmother, with whom she lives, is there. So I'm talking to the grandmother for a minute, and I'm saying, well, how's she doing? I'm asking questions about the girl. Well, she's doing really great. This is about the best she's ever done in her life. Well, maybe I'm not hearing something right. Maybe I got something wrong. Maybe I'm just imagining this. Is it just something I think that I ought to do, or is this really from God? Right? I really messed up because I got the idea that things weren't going so good. I didn't walk the last 10 feet. And I doubt I'd ever forget. By Monday morning, she was nearly dead in the hospital from referring to, whatever it is. Makes you feel about that talk. I don't know what I was going to say because I was never given, because I never learned. But when I learned that out, found that out the next couple of days in the prayer chain, I really felt horrible because I know that I was supposed to go talk to her. And I believed a lie. And her grandmother is not a satanic type of person, but I still believed something I shouldn't have believed. And it interfered with me rechecking myself. It would have been far better to went over there and talk to her, even though nothing came out of it. And I had been wrong. On the other hand, the way it went, I don't believe that. I believe the Lord was going to give me something to say, and I got it. You don't know what it was. But I would know my mistake. And I played that over hundreds, thousands of times. Why didn't I take those few feet? I've sat and talked to strangers out at the lake, that things that Truman, a guy on a motorcycle and his girlfriend for 2 hours about the Lord and different things. I've sat in restaurants and Warrensburg when Nick was in school and go in there and there's a guy eating. I sit down and I talk. We just start talking and he just opens up and we sat there and talk about the Lord and things and where they're going, what's going, and it's just amazing. I call them divine appointments. And I may not ever see these people again. But nonetheless, when you mess up really big and you messed up, you don't forget it and you learn from it. And you learn to say, yes, Lord. And then you get up from your seat and you go over there and you don't let anything change. You don't listen to other people, regardless of how good intention it may seem. You listen to the Lord. And that's a hard lesson. And I don't care to repeat it. And I don't want to do it over again.
Maybe Dawn, her grandmother's eyes, she was doing good for that.
She was.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it until the moment that it hit, that the Lord knew that it was coming. And I didn't go. And so that you learn from your mistakes. And it's challenging. You realize that you have missed the opportunity. Make the most of every opportunity. That verse is kind of haunting. Because when you don't make the most of every opportunity, it can come back to haunt you from time. And every now and then you get a glimpse. The guy I'm training to be a jailer will eventually take my place. And I know I've said this to some of you, maybe you all heard it. We went through the gospel presentation. He had been recently divorced and was going through a whole bunch of stuff and was more interested in the next model than some other things. But nonetheless, we had a pretty good conversation about this and got up to the point of, you need to be saved. Yeah, but you want to be saved, do that right here in this crazy county jail and all that. Doesn't matter where you're at. And he said, well, I'm just not ready. I don't think I'm ready. I go back several years later. I don't know why I go back to the jail. I don't hardly ever go back to the jail just to see the old people that I used to know. But I did that day. I went back to Southern morning, so I go into the jail and I see who's on there, and it's this guy that I trained. I said, you got a minute? I said, yeah. He said, well, come back to your old office. I want to talk to you here in a couple of minutes. He said, I got a couple of things I got to finish up. We got that done. Then we went back to the office and he said, you remember witnessing to me that one day? I said, yeah. I could tell that you were wanting to, but you really in there and all that. well, he said, I got remarried about a year and a half ago, and me and my new wife were having trouble, so it looked like it was gonna end up like with my first marriage. He said, we decided that we'd go to church. So we started going to church, and we both got saved, and now everything's turned around and came back together. He said, and I really appreciate what you said. Although he didn't necessarily seem, he wasn't mad. He didn't say anything horribly bad, but every now and then you get to see how something you said made a difference down the line. No, I didn't lead him to the Lord, but it was a preparation. And it was a plowing of the soil, if you will, in that regard. And so somebody plows, somebody else reaps.
Yep.
And we need to realize that no matter which part of that you are, that it all counts. If God can orchestrate all the things in the birth of Christ up to the New Jerusalem and put it in perfect timing and bring it all about, then the least, I like the verse that says that if you give a cup of cold water, to a prophet, you receive a prophet's reward, or something like that. And so it's as much as the least that you could do. God will remember that, and we'll be blessed because of it, no matter how small we think it was, or maybe we didn't even know what we were doing. And my thing is that obedience is, and I think this is a lot of what this chapter is going into, because it was the obedience of Christ. He was willing and obedient. He denied even the death on the cross, Philippians chapter 2. And we need to be likewise. It's not easy. If I think it was hard in our lives, what was it like for Christ?
Right.
And
Let's say bye to Dave
Dave,
and the rest of the internet.
Take care, guys. Stay healthy.
yes.
Don't tell us how to stay.
Have
Have a good evening. Don't forget to shovel your snow tomorrow.
hey, I'll be right up there.
All right, good. You heard him volunteer, right?
Yeah.
Volunteered to shovel the city snow. Thanks, Dave. Cheers.